Hi, and welcome to Growth Talks. I'm Christina Rubino, the General Manager of the Offline Practice at Right Side Up, and your host. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. Over the past year, we've had the privilege of speaking with some of the brightest minds in the industry who have shared some incredible insights. So we thought, why not bring together the highlights, at least some of them, in one special episode? Whether you're a longtime listener or you're just joining us, this collection of standout moments is packed with wisdom, inspiration, and actionable takeaways, just like every other Growth Talks episode. So without further ado, here are some of our favorite moments from Growth Talks in 2024. Happy holidays and Happy New Year. On our very first episode of Growth Talks, Manbir Sodhia, SVP of Marketing at Whisker, brought us his framework for finding product market fit in today's complex performance landscape. In this clip, he discusses his pirate funnel approach, the power of scrappy experimentation, and why learning fast is the ultimate growth driver. Given all the new complexities today with performance advertising and marketing, how do you know you have product market fit? How do you go about finding it? And how do, when you really, how do you know, right? Not just inclination, not just testing and results and whatever, but how do you know?
Great question. So, I think there's a few dimensions in which to splice this, and there's the customer's journey that's somewhat universal. I like the pirate funnel setup: awareness, acquisition, activation, revenue, referral, retention. First letter spells out R, like a pirate. But, just being able to look through the customer journey without lens and create a matrix view, whatever that might be for your business, whether you're using one of the newer apps out there or something as simple as Google Sheets, just going and creating marketing moments, campaigns, messages, websites, themes, whatever, but basically testing whatever research you have on your positioning, your brand tone, your personality, your how you want to take your product to market. You need to constantly validate that across all those touch points on the funnel. I mean, for sure, businesses care about one thing, that's driving revenue and being able to do that consistently, reliably. So you're going to have to look at that pirate funnel and now take in your acquisition channels into the mix and see if those messages, if those creatives resonate. And it's about being scrappy as well, especially in the earlier days. You cannot have endless assumptions and you can't have endless polish on some of this work. It's important to just get things out the gate to learn fast. That's key, right? Growth is all about learning, and it boils down to having an experiments matrix where everything you do, every campaign, every touch point is an experiment, from a Facebook ad to your entire pricing strategy. And so I guess my point here is there is no easy answer. You're gonna have to constantly test. And the big question of when, really, it depends on the business, it depends on the product, but I think it when you're able to recreate that reliably. It's about spinning the flywheel and making sure it's able to continue spinning.
Yeah. And it's funny, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but one of the things that I recently learned about you, and this is the whole, we all have our little tricks, right? We all have our playbook or our things that we do that we're oh, I can apply this here. But you take it to another level, my friends. You have created, and to your point, it's in Google Sheets. It's not a mythical document or an expensive subscription or whatever, but you have a growth matrix that you've created over time and refined over time. And I was so impressed by it. So to your point about experimentation, how did you organize this? And just tell me a little bit about the way you thought about building that matrix and executing it.
Absolutely. So no, I appreciate that. It's about having a centralized ledger, between growth teams, marketing, product, engineering. Really, it's something that you can put out to the whole company. Now, you'll have a few key stakeholders on it. You need a single owner within the business who manages that process, that program, who has very clear ownership, but then you want multiple teams and groups and people to be able to contribute to it. It's really, like we said, it's not rocket science. It's about being able to document something at scale and repeat it quarterly or annually, but essentially going back to the topic of the pirate funnel, identify which part of the funnel you want to impact, put a target out there, a threshold for success. Did you hit the target or did you not hit the target based off that test? Was there stat sig or not? What is the next step? Nothing is ever one and done. There's always an evolution. There's always multiple iterations that come forward. So you have to align as a team and ask yourself, does this scale? What would we try differently? And so that's really what it comes down to. Growth in my opinion, is synonymous with learning and having a high learning quotient mindset where you bring groups of people together. We're excited about learning and growing. And yes, we're going to make a lot of mistakes. You might 7 out of 10 tests might fail. That's okay. You're learning and you're continuing to develop that program and process. That's what matters.
Next, we have Patrick Moran, Head of Growth Marketing at Robinhood, unpacking the often overlooked tension between brand and performance marketing. In this clip, Patrick sheds light on how blending data with storytelling can unlock growth and why brand strategy is more than just a buzzword. It's a game-changing approach for today's marketers. I think there's so much that we don't talk about when it comes to the tension between growth marketing and brand advertising. But you have often talked about how marrying both data and storytelling is actually how you achieve success in our business, right? And you've made a point around brand advertising and how that has to play an important role in overall growth strategy. So to start us off, just for everybody watching or listening, can you define the difference between brand marketing and brand advertising?
Yeah. So, I think that's one of the mistakes that most people make, right? Whenever they're saying, okay, well, should we invest in brand or performance? And really they're trying to use sort of a performance lens onto, brand advertising, when the reality is brand advertising is usually just one component of a brand strategy holistically. So brand marketing, maybe I'll talk about brand strategy just in general, maybe just because once we start to get into brand marketing, it becomes a little bit more nebulous from that standpoint. But Joanna Lord, who is the CMO of Spring Health, so she came from Reforged, and she actually wrote an article about this and talked about brand strategy for startups. And essentially what she says is that there's a couple of components to brand strategy, right? There's the actual development of it. What's your tone, what's your voice, what's your mission, your vision, and things like that, which are basically the inputs to just ensure that there's alignment across the board between marketing, product, customer service, sales, and what have you, right? And so that there's just this level of consistency. But the one component I think where sort of advertising starts to fit in is in the distribution. And there's many different ways to distribute it, right? There's many different ways to distribute and communicate your brand. And one of them is media. And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to completely use your performance perspectives on it, which typically have a much shorter look back period than sort of your brand advertising, and then employ it there, just because then the goals are different, right? So generally speaking, your brand strategy is just this much more holistic approach to how you want your brand to show up with your audience. And brand advertising is basically the use of paid media to try and communicate your brand to a particular target audience.
So it's interesting, in less charitable things than I've heard when people are talking about brand marketing and brand strategy and the application of that to paid media. There's an old joke in our business that it's well, if you had a sans serif font and a Facebook advertising budget for a little while there, you had a brand, right? What's really interesting to me about the marketing environment that we find ourselves in now, kind of after the reckoning of the last couple of years, where as an industry, we stopped prioritizing growth at all costs. We started prioritizing efficiency and true performance. How do you see the concepts of brand advertising, brand marketing, brand strategy playing out in today's growth marketing environment?
It depends. So, I think there's a couple components to it. So let me dive into, there is a component of, performance marketing. You're still shelling out creatives, right? You still have creatives that hit the market. And, there are certain situations where your unit economics would actually work out, even if you're using quote unquote, non-traditional performance media channels like TV or out of home, or using sort of some type of digital takeover, right? The unit economics might still work out. And so by definition, you're actually optimizing towards performance marketing metrics. And the audience on the other side of that doesn't care whether that's coming from your performance marketing team or your brand marketing team. They just care that it's coming from this one brand. They don't really care about your org structure, right?
No, I'm just laughing because I'm just it is so true. As marketers, we get so hung up on these definitions and these silos in a sense. And it's just dude, if it's good creative, people don't know. Consumers don't know precisely in the context, which bucket the money comes out of, right? And good growth marketing should build your brand, and good brand advertising should, perform and drive people kind of down your funnel.
Yeah. And I guess tactically speaking, right? If you just take a step back, Tactically speaking, the most classic performance marketing channels, specifically Google and Facebook, and to some level programmatic advertising, if you look at their algorithms and you look at how they're bringing you users, they're essentially scouring their entire network using the signals that they have to give you users or customers that are already in market for something that you offer, right? Which is by definition why you call it demand collection, right? And for the most part, that's why you have much stricter look back periods, right? Not payback periods. I mean, payback periods is a different sort of situation, but you have much stricter look back periods. For consumer, it's typically 24 hours to 7 days. For B2B, it could be 24 hours. I mean, it could be 7 days or 30 days, but there's a look back period. And look back period is there because you have some level of confidence that whatever it is that you're offering, these publishers are able to get enough signal to bring you those users. Now, the problem there is that at some point that starts to hit diminishing returns. And the reason why that hits diminishing returns is because there's a competitive dynamic that's out in the market that's also trying to reach the audience that you're trying to reach. And so from that standpoint, that's where you have to start to differentiate yourself. And there are many ways to differentiate yourself. One of them is brand advertising, and that's where a lot of companies would go outside of these traditional two channels and actually start to try and stir up what we call demand generation, right? And so from that standpoint, the partnership then is that you're able to stimulate some level of demand so that Google and Facebook can pick that up and then eventually pass that on to your users. That's why there are a lot of conversations around basically the marriage between these types of advertising mechanisms, the goals, the strategies, along with how you measure them and actually gain confidence that what you're doing is actually working.
It was a joy to talk with Sarah Crockett, Chief Marketing Officer at DSW, who shared how customer insights can drive transformational marketing shifts. Sarah explains how listening to data and trends helped DSW evolve from a house of boots to a fall trend destination, meeting customers where they are, whether that's on city streets or hiking trails.
Could you share an example of how you've used customer insights to drive a major marketing shift, either at DSW or in current recent roles or anything like that?
Yeah, a couple of examples come to mind with DSW. First and foremost, so our name, DSW, stands for Designer Shoe Warehouse. And so we have built this reputation over multiple decades of being the place to go for exactly what you needed when you were going to our 34th Street location, dress shoes, right? So then we started to see and hear from our consumers through their searches on the site or through our regular quarterly brand equity surveys that we do and or through our data that we get access through our ad partners. And this was over the recent months and years, frankly, that the athletic and casual trend was not just a trend. In fact, it's staying. So we needed to beef up our assortment because when women were coming to DSW for a typical, whether it was like a black pump or a wedge or something of that nature for office and work needs, that is actually changing in real time to a great cute sneaker and a court shoe. And she's wearing it with her dress or her suit. And so that need is shifting. The reason why we saw that was obviously you can see it through just general culture and paying attention to what people are wearing. But we also started to see it through our data. So investing in a major strategic shift in our assortment in favor of beefing up and getting the best brands, which we do. We have the New Balances, we have Skechers, we have Nike, we have Adidas, we have all the greatest athletic brands assorted for our customer now, which was rooted in them asking for it, which is data. We also, another recent example, if you would have looked at DSW a year ago at this very moment, we would be the house of boots because it's fall. And again, dress shoes, right? That being the key to who we've been and always have had a role in our customers' lives for. So now this year, we're actually transitioning that from a house of boots to a fall trend house because we saw the footwear trends during this period of time taking on a very large variety. So you definitely have the boot, you have the knee-high boot, you have the slouch boot, you have the moto boot, but you also have the ballet flats and the Mary Janes and a whole array of sneakers that go along with that too. And we have the best trending styles and brands available. So why pigeonhole ourselves to one category? And we, again, get this from data, seeing how our customers are coming to us, what they're asking us for. And we do weekly deep dives into customer sentiment through our customer service to help inform improvements in our order management process and all of those different areas of the funnel, essentially, that we can have a positive impact with our customer.
Yeah, I love that because I don't know why, but you just reminded me of the Devil Wears Prada scene where she's like, oh, florals for spring, how novel. Like,
Yes.
Of course you're going to wear a boot in fall at some point, but I don't know about you. I know you're in Park City. I'm in Vegas. It is still 101 here. So it's so warm. And the last thing I want to put on my feet right now is a boot. But will I wear like a chunky heel now? Like, yeah, I'm there. Like I'll wear, you know what I mean? Like there's also something about like, it's a national brand. And so when you're paying attention to what your customers are searching for at that moment, and you're also taking into account the fact that the US is a huge and also very like geographically diverse country. I love the positioning of Fall Fashion House versus just like boots, because again, obviously boots for fall, but depending on where you are in the country, you might already be looking at snow boots. You might be looking at rain boots. You might be looking at pumps for a business meeting. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. And another different example, it also allows you, by looking at your customers and looking at it through the lens of data, it also allows you to discover, frankly, challenges that maybe you had no idea existed, right? So when I was at REI, we enlisted a company to do a body of research for us with regard to gender equity in the outdoors. So we wanted to understand both through access of gear and apparel at the right sizes, at the right levels of sort of SKU diversity, to also just people's experiences in the outdoors. And it led us to this really interesting, and it's published, so you can actually find it if you search Force of Nature REI research. Some combination of those terms will point you to it. But we'll show you the results of the research really pointed at a challenge that we maybe hypothesized exists, but it really quantified it. And that was women's experience in the outdoors and them not feeling that it was an equitable experience through either not having the right access to gear and apparel for their needs. If they were, for example, a size 14, then most often they were having to shop in the men's department and they didn't have the right fits and sizes. And there were a whole bunch of issues that came from that, or even literally your time in the outdoors. And this has been a popular topic as of recently, which is bear or man. And that honestly came up in our research years ago. And that was a real factor. So we built a whole program at REI called Force of Nature, which was all around creating equity from a gender perspective in the outdoors, treating the outdoors as the largest level playing field. Now, the naysayers would immediately come at us and say, well, there's no problem in the outdoors when it comes to gender equity. And we'd actually be able to show the research to say, actually, here's what we're looking at. And this is a sample size that was strong enough for us to feel comfortable declaring it to be an issue and comfortable giving ourselves a role in helping to repair the issue.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's kind of wild. Like what year was that research conducted?
That was probably 2017, 2018.
It's crazy that like then 5 years later, like culture actually caught up to it, which is wild. So it just kind of goes to show you that if you're paying attention to your customers and you're looking at customer insights, like you can actually get ahead of the trends and already be there.
Jason Ng, CMO at Gusto, challenges the traditional view of B2B marketing as purely irrational play. In this clip, Jason explains how emotions like trust and confidence shape decision-making and shares a behind-the-scenes look at Gusto's Choose Gusto campaign, highlighting the power of storytelling and connecting with business owners.
Do you find yourself being more deliberate in considering all the different touch points on the customer journey in B2B? Or would you say that it's like kind of equally intentional between B2B and B2C? And like what lessons have you brought over from B2C that shape how you are approaching B2B marketing? Which is, I think historically, we kind of look at B2B marketing as marketers as like more official, for lack of a better word. It's like, but we forget sometimes that business decision makers are also consumers. What are the lessons that you find yourself and what kind of intentionality are you bringing to all of the touch points in like a B2B customer's journey?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll hear a lot about how B2B decisions are more rational and structured, and that is very true. But as you allude to, emotion does play a big role because you're selling to humans at the end of the day, and people want to feel confident that they're making the right choice, especially when those stakes are high. And so just like in B2C, there are emotions. I mean, those emotions might be a little bit different, but in a B2B context, there's things like trust and confidence and knowing that I'm making the right decision decisions. Those are really important elements to how you might pivot, where you focus emotionally on the type of response and payoff that you want your marketing to deliver. And I will say there is this idea that you don't have to worry about emotion in the B2B space and that you can be completely rational. Just give people the facts, a reason to buy, and they'll choose you. And I think in some cases, like if you're the only one in that market or you're doing something and offering something that's truly unique, that might work. But in any marketing context, you're dealing with competitors, and to some extent, and I learned this way back from when I was marketing diapers at Procter and Gamble, like at the end of the day, they're all kind of this one and the same, right? And you can argue that in a lot of B2B contexts, that is true too. But you really have to look at what is the story that, and what is that narrative that you want to stick with customers about what it is you provide. So like when you look at companies like Google or Apple, you could argue, why would they need to advertise when everyone knows about them? But it's really because the products that we buy and the services that we use often say something about us. And that's where storytelling becomes such a powerful vehicle. But where I would say B2B marketers may be misled into thinking you don't do things like brand is this idea that you're targeting a much narrower segment. But oftentimes we conflate brand marketing and mass marketing, and we assume that they're the same. But you don't need to, in mass marketing, being like, I need to run a Super Bowl ad, and I'm never going to do that because my target audience is this small. But it's really not about the channel. It's really about figuring out how you deliver that narrative in the right way through whatever channels might make sense for you. And so I think when you can identify whether that's an event or something experiential or something in partnership with sales, figuring out how to deliver that narrative and land that narrative is a really important thing that I find that B2B marketers need to figure out how to do well, because you're not going to win on search ads or a rational pitch in and of itself.
Yeah, I had not heard the notion that brands and marketers conflate brand marketing and mass marketing. That is it's so insightful, because there is this notion of like brand being more of a spray and pray. And it's B2B is often considered kind of formulaic as well. One of my questions for you is like, do you think that B2B marketers have a responsibility to tap into emotions when marketing these products? Why do you think we tend to overlook storytelling on the B2B marketing side? Is it that like, okay, this is a rational consumer, or I should say a more rational consumer? And then can you share any examples from your work where emotions played a critical role in a successful campaign?
I don't have the silver bullet answer, but I have some hypothesis as to why. And I think part of it has to do with, again, that idea that, well, I can't afford to do brand marketing because I can't afford to do TV, but TV is not the whole universe of brand marketing, right? And even within TV, I mean, when you're talking linear TV, you now have much more efficient and targeted ways to reach people through connected TV or podcasts or experiential events type marketing or hospitality services and things like that can really deliver a high impact brand experience for your customers or your prospects. So part of it is channel. I think part of it too is a good B2B marketer often traditionally is very tied to sales, and they have a strong partnership with their salesperson or their sales leaders. And your sales leader is thinking oftentimes like, how do I make this number? And they're thinking about the short-term outcome. And that's no fault, and that's not a flaw. And wouldn't even consider it a bug or anything, but it's just the nature of how sales works. It's like, we need to make quota. I need to make quota to get paid. And so I think sometimes strong B2B marketers may come up through a very sales-led culture where they either haven't been exposed as much to traditional marketing practices, or they'll do whatever it is that helps make that short-term outcome a reality. And so when you're invested into storytelling and emotions, like you're playing the long game and you're investing in something that will pay off over a sometimes short, but mostly a medium and long-term time frame. And so it is a conviction type of activity, which sometimes B2B marketers might overlook because it's like, I got to make this quarterly number. I help my sales leader make this quarterly number now. And so I think that's what it comes down to. And I don't profess to be right or wrong. It's just my point of view that's why it is. But I have certainly seen in multiple instances in my career where strong emotional storytelling, whether it's work I've done at AWS or work that I've done now at Gusto, is a big component to really delivering outcomes and not only solidifying brands, but helping other channels become more efficient. So I'll give you one example where we just launched a campaign called Choose Gusto. Actually, we launched it a year ago in a few select markets, but we're now launching it nationally because we've seen success in the markets where we've launched it in. And I've been very deliberate about keeping to a consistent message because I do believe that consistency in how you show up creatively, it builds trust. It also builds recall. And so this whole campaign was built around a simple but powerful insight that running a business is tough. And business owners often face a lot of pressure, uncertainty, and just endless decision making. So we asked ourselves a big question, like, what would you rather choose? And we played with it by comparing mundane, boring tasks like watching grass grow to doing things like time tracking or payroll. And the fun twist was that those tedious tasks that you might see as tedious, at least, are actually much easier with Gusto. And this really struck a chord because we tapped into this emotional side of our audience's everyday struggles. And so choosing Gusto wasn't about just a payroll solution or an HR job to be done, but it became a message of empowerment and confidence. And we wanted to show businesses that they're not alone. And with Gusto, they have a partner that simplifies those tough decisions overall.
Finally, Tyler Elliston, founder of Right Side Up. Tyler tackles one of the biggest challenges for growing businesses, finding and evaluating the right marketing talent at every stage of growth. From versatile generalists to focus specialists, he shares what makes a great hire and why traits like curiosity and tenacity are game changers.
How do you suggest the evaluation of talent go when it's like an earlier stage company? Maybe there's only one or two marketing hires that got there before you, or a late stage company where it's like you're maybe steps away from an acquisition or an IPO or something, and the needs of the organization are super different.
Generally, we see a pattern. I say we see because it's not just from my experience, but the thousands of companies we've worked with at this point. Usually companies move from a generalist sort of need to a specialist need as the company gets bigger and gets later and later stage. So oftentimes, like the first marketing hire is usually not a specialist in a particular channel. Usually it's someone who's really hungry, really versatile, can do a lot of different things with 85% proficiency. And then as a company sort of figures out what works, then they can go get more specialists as they build off the team. Late stage, typically organizations are staffed with much more specialists, people that are spending 40 hours a week just doing their particular channel or their channel for a particular segment of the customer base. So I think that would probably be the biggest observation in terms of how it evolves from early stage to late stage. I think there are certainly some traits that are more valuable across stages. So like early stage, autonomy is just critical to have in a marketing hire because want to look over their shoulder. Sometimes it's impossible to look over their shoulder. You really need them to be curious and sort of ask the next question, come to the right answer, which then produces more questions and go track down those answers. That's not nearly as, though certainly a good trait at any stage, it's not as mission critical for a really late stage environment.
Yeah, you're making me almost think about the intangibles. It's so hard to understand who a human being is just from like the half an hour or 45 minutes you spend with them when they interview. And there are some people that interview really great. And then when you get them in seat, you're like, oh no, this is not what I signed up for with you. Or vice versa, people that, maybe they're a little shyer or for whatever reason, they don't show up in an interview setting and you have to kind of like pull it out of them a little bit.
Right.
I mean, and also like none of us are natural in an interview setting. Like both of us are
Right.
a very slightly different version of ourselves in this interview setting, right? So
Right.
what do you look for to indicate that somebody is like great? What are the intangibles that tell you, oh, this person's excellent?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And this is going to seem overly simplistic, and yet it so commonly is overlooked. One of the biggest things that I look for is I want to see signs that they want to be great, that they actually care about their job. I mean, there are a lot of people that just don't look at work that way, and that's okay. But for a lot of early stage companies, that is just not what they need. Like they don't need somebody that's just going to say, okay, I'm going to clock in, clock out. My real passion is over here. People whose passion is their craft do great things. And particularly in early stage, you need that focus and dedication. So that would be the first one that comes to mind. I can certainly give you some others, but I feel like that one's weirdly contrarian or overlooked.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I've started saying, I don't actually even know if I've said this to you yet, but I can't make you care about your job more than you do. That is the one I can teach anybody. Listen, you can give me like a reasonably competent human being and give me a couple of years with them and like, And if they care, we can do great things together. But if I can't make you want to be the best in the world at your craft, I can't make you curious, right?
Right.
So what are some of the other intangibles? So Tyler's going to hate that I'm going to say this like publicly, but Tyler is one of the best judges of talent I've met, because at Right Side Up, even still, well, it's true, because even at Right Side Up, we're a fairly large company. And I would say you're probably still at the end of most of the interview loops that we have, just because all of the leaders in our company, we very much value your input. So yeah, like tell me some more. Tell me your secrets, Tyler.
I mean, I think the sort of passion for the work is part of it, but it's also just like, who are you? Like, what makes you tick? Why? Like, how did you get into marketing? I mean, these are questions that lead really interesting places. Like, okay, you're 30 years old or 35 or 25, whatever it is. Like, how did you end up here? And to hear these stories, and have you thought about pivoting into something totally different? Just understanding how people tick often can help uncover the sort of like, do they have the drive, and what is their drive really for? It also importantly helps us evaluate if we are a good fit for them. I always say to full-time candidates, like, I'm talking to them, yes, to evaluate them, but I'm also there to help them evaluate us and to help evaluate this role. And that's not just because I'm nice. That's because if it's not a win-win, if it's not great for them, then they're not going to do great work, or they're not going to stick around for a long time. So anyway, so that's sort of one line of questioning. I think other traits, you mentioned curiosity, plus one to that. I think curiosity paired with tenacity is great. It's like, okay, you have the questions, you wonder, but what do you do with that? Do you just sort of sit on it? Do you ask your manager, or do you go and dig? Like, do you go to the internet? Do you go to your peers? There's somebody that I managed at one company. She was amazing. And I just remember this interaction. It's just seared in my memory, where she kind of laid out a problem. And I was like, oh, well, seems like we might want to go do this. And she was like, oh yeah, I did that. And so then that led me to this and this and this. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Then I guess we should go do this and this. She's like, right. So I did that. And then we got here and I was like, great. So what are we talking about? She was like, I just wanted to let you know. And this is the conclusion. Does that sound right? I'm like, yeah, sounds like you, because she was curious. She found the bottom of the rabbit hole. She did it with tenacity. And I mean, that was amazing. And that was sort of the first moment where I first thought like, wow, curiosity and tenacity paired together is something that I want to look for in every person I interview moving forward.
There's two very dumb things that I say about the team we hire at Right Side Up, but I think every single person is this person. So one is, were you the kid that kept asking why and would not let it go until you got an answer, right? Like to the point probably where you look back and now you're like, oh my God, I drove my parents crazy. Mm-hmm. Were you that kid? And then the other one is, did you take over the group project in school?
And that's a wrap on Growth Talks and a wrap on 2024. Thank you to all of our guests and listeners. We appreciate the time you spend with us nerding out about marketing and growth. We hope you loved revisiting these moments as much as we did.